Jane actually gave the commencement speech for her class at Wellesley. So she began kind of engaging with alums from the moment that she became an alum upon graduation. Jane is a comedian. She lives in Greenwich, Connecticut, and has appeared on The View, Lifetime TV, Girls Night Out, Fox's season finale of 24, NBC's Last Comic Standing, and also on the Today Show. So she has spent a lot of time in a lot of different ways, making people laugh and making people think, which is a great combination. So she is going to take the conversation from here and introduce a student who is going to be a part of our conversation, and then also Susan. So if you have questions along the way, we can see the chat function. So please feel free to use that chat function and throw in any questions that you might have.
Great. My turn? Yeah. You're already muted. Oh, yeah, Nancy Barron, I'm so glad you're here. Okay. I see a number of the mighty class of 73 are here, which is great. I have no picture here, but I'm just going to keep talking. Yes. Hold on, let me change my view to gallery. Okay, that's better. Anyway, we're going to have a great show today. My name is Jane Condon. If you like me, if you don't like me, my name is Susan McPherson. No, I'm just kidding. But she is an amazing person. And we're just talking in the green room beforehand, and her book is still in the front window of Barnes and Noble, prominently displayed. It's called The Lost Art of Connecting. I read it once for pleasure and once to prepare for this. So anyway, it's McGraw-Hill. I've never seen a book before that has 6 pages of praise. I mean, she knows a lot of people. Anyway, it is a really, really valuable book, which is why I wanted to introduce her to the Wellesley community, because we're women who are doing things too. So just some background on Susan first, just to embarrass her. She's the founder of a communications consultancy called McPherson Strategies, McPherson, 25 years in marketing, public relations, corporate responsibility. When I see a big ad that corporations have taken out and CEOs in New York Times, something about ESG, I think, oh, Susan's probably got a hand in that. Okay, she basically, sorry, what? I couldn't hear. Anyway, she's everywhere. But we're also both part of a 500-woman online group called The List, and she's just the biggest giver on the list. You should include her in your network if at all possible, or as an advisor to your startup, or if you're lucky enough, as a friend. I barely knew her, and she had me doing my act on her rooftop in Brooklyn. That's a good person. She takes a chance on people. She connects people. I'm so glad that she wrote this book. And what's kind of also happy news for me today is I'm not her only Wellesley connection. Her niece, Jules Spector, is here. I'll throw it to Jules. And she's about to enter the real world, and she has a job. So we're very happy for Jules. Anyway, I can see the family resemblance. I don't know on your gallery view, but they're right beside each other. So, okay, Susan, so let's get this show on the road. You are what's known as a serial connector. And I remember this started with your parents. They were also serial connectors. So can you talk a bit about that? Where's my Susan?
Sorry, I maybe after 3 years on Zoom, had it on mute. First and foremost, Jane, thank you for your kind words. And Becky and Destiny, I am so grateful for this opportunity. And to my dear niece, Jules, who inspires me every single day with her brilliance and compassion, and has given me, in addition to Jane, a wonderful visibility into the incredible college and collegiate atmosphere that Wellesley has. And since Jules started at Wellesley a few years back, I have noticed such a growth and a passion for learning. I mean, she had it all her childhood, but it's really clearly the institution has sparked something in they. which is remarkable to me. So thank you for all the collective effort. But yes, my late parents, Jules' grandparents, were serial connectors in the 40s, 50s, 60s. And I joke, but it's completely true that every morning at the breakfast table, when I was 6, 7, and 8, I would vie for real estate for my bowl of cereal or my cinnamon toast, because my parents would have the 5 local newspapers. We lived in upstate New York. And yesterday's or the day before's Boston Globe and New York Times, because they came via the mail. And they would be sitting, clipping and cutting, and then going to their respective manual typewriters and typing out short little missives. And this happened every single day. And they would go to, in my father's case, former students, because my dad was a professor and he stayed in touch with students and their children and their grandchildren, almost 40 years. And to relatives, to friends. And in my mother's case, she worked in public relations for various PBS stations. So her letters would be going off to Jim and John and Henry at various news sites. Well, they were newspapers back then. And of course, they were all white men. But watching them every morning, I assumed everybody's parents did this. Years later, when the internet happened in the 90s and I was coming of age professionally, I could do what they were doing via email, but so much more effectively. So I could take one article that I found somewhere on the internet and connect 15 or 20 people that didn't know each other on that same email and say, this may be of interest. And by the way, you all need to meet. And it became what my card carrying, like how I describe myself. So really that's where it kind of was born. And I'll stop there, but
okay.
Certainly dive.
I think we also need to introduce there's another character in this play. In back of Susan, if you notice that white thing that's kind of moving, that's Phoebe, her dog, her beloved dog. So I'm glad that Phoebe could come to the show.
Completely on the floor.
Phoebe likes to be in on all these shows. Anyway, so I noticed that your book is divided into 3, gather, ask, do. Can you explain why?
Of course. For the students who are here, when you get your book deal, you will have to come up with a methodology. It's kind of a requirement. And I'm the least methodological person you will ever meet. But I was able to look back at my 30 plus years of professional experience and realize the gather, ask, do is what I've been doing. And I do want to just jump back real quickly. One of the impetuses for writing my book is I founded my company at age 48. I just turned 58. We now are profitable, about a $3 million business. I have 16 employees and 90% of our business has been inbound. So what that told me is when I graduated college and then went to grad school and started building connections in my 20s, in my 30s, in my 40s, those have come back to help. So I think it's a really important message to share with people who are just starting their career that tend to think, oh, networking isn't important or building connections isn't important. Believe me, in my 20s, in my 30s, and a good part of my 40s, if you had said you're going to be running a company someday, I would have laughed. I was the furthest thing from an entrepreneur. In fact, I still can't handle a spreadsheet. So anyway, I may need to go back to college myself to learn. But so the gather, ask, do is the methodology that is laid out in the book. And I'll give you a 30,000 foot view. First section, gather. Most important person to connect with, bar none, is yourself.
Yeah.
And you do a bit of a deep dive or an audit to think about what your goals are, okay? No matter where we are in our lives, fresh out of college, approaching retirement, past retirement, we still have goals, we still have hopes, we still have dreams. So the goal in the gather section is to really think about what are your hopes and dreams, what are your goals, and how can the people that you know or the people that you hope to know can be helpful. But also, how can you be helpful to others? You also, in the gather phase, think about how you're going to do everything you can to break that hermetically sealed bubble that so many of us live in, myself included, where we tend to attract and stay with people and befriend people and work with people who look like us, sound like us, the same age, race, and color and religion as us. So it's an important thing to be thinking as you build up your gather. And lastly, in gather, one of the underlying themes of the entire book is flipping networking on its head. Networking traditionally, we've been taught, is all about what can we get? What can we gain? Who's the person who can help me get ahead? Who's the person who can introduce me? And I like to think about who's the person we can help? How can we show up for others? How can we make introductions or recommend a favorite food or a place to visit or a museum or a temple? How can we be leading with what we know and our superpowers that can be driving help? And that is the gather phase.
Yeah. I just want to say those 5 words are you in a nutshell, Susan. How can I help? That's 4 words, but close. Anyway, how can I help?
But if we don't know what our superpowers are, if we don't feel like we can articulate them, oftentimes we don't know how we can be helpful. And I guarantee you, every single person who is on this Zoom chat has ways to be helpful. And we don't have to be millionaires. We don't have to be heiresses. We don't have to know a million people. We could have an amazing recipe for spaghetti sauce, and you can share that with somebody. And guess what? We're being helpful.
And just to jump in, I think that really connects to Wellesley's motto, which is non ministari sed ministrare, which is not to be ministered unto, but to minister. So I think the message that you're sending is really important for Wellesley students and alumni alike who have kind of been taught this this way of thinking and way of being for at least 4 years.
Amazing. Thank you for adding that. I don't even think I could say that with those words. Do you still all study Latin? I imagine way back when. Jane, did you study Latin?
I studied Latin at my Catholic high school, and I came to Wellesley and I said, Veni, Vidi, Vici. I saw I conquered, and then, no, Jane, it's Weini, Weedy, Vici. And I'm there like, what? I don't think Julius Caesar said on his horse, excuse me, Weini, Weedy, Vici. I think he was up there, Veni, Vidi, Vici. So I'm a church Latin girl. But anyway, okay, now on to ask. We did gather, so ask.
So ask is learning how to ask the meaningful questions of others so you can learn what their hopes and dreams are.
Oh.
Okay, and oftentimes we're very good at asking questions, but we may not be good at listening. And believe me, myself included, yeah, and certainly the pandemic hasn't helped our attention span. But it's also learning how to be a better listener, because if you ask the right questions and then you listen, you can go on to the do phase. And the do phase is where I love to live, Jane loves to live. And that's where we're like, what can we do? But it's also, you know, for those of you who are like, oh my God, I can't take on helping. I'm having a hard enough time helping myself. It's more about being reliable, being responsive, showing up for people, saying and doing the things that you said originally you were going to do. And also, if you can't, that's okay too, but own up to it and maybe get back to it later.
Yeah.
That really is the gather, ask, do in a nutshell.
And I have so many phrases of yours going back to the book the second time that I copied down. Like you say, we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. That's very wise. And I loved invite to get invited, get uncomfortable. You know, your one though, how can I help? That was the number one. And I thought it was very interesting how you said connection is actually a learned skill. So, you know, that made me feel better, because I found in comedy, just you have to be social. I got 6 out of 7 TV spots from friends. You know, they just told me what was going on and apply for this. 1 from my manager. So it's just something, you know, to keep in mind. And then you do talk in the book about in-person versus digital. And so I wondered if you could help people with the pluses and minuses of which medium is the best in real life, Zoom, on the phone, snail mail. How does it break down?
Well, lots of things. So I'm going to give you some tips. One of the things I always do when I meet people is I ask them what their favorite way of communications is. And I think we make assumptions based on generation that, you know, older and younger people like to text. Well, if we don't ask, we won't know. And
that's a good tip.
It's a very kind of lovely gesture to ask people how they want to receive, right?
Yeah.
So
I'm writing it down.
And then you can just make a note in their contact info. Because I have some people that, it's Signal or WhatsApp. I have other people that want to walk and talk. I have, it runs the gamut, and it isn't age related or sex related. The other thing too is, we have just come out of a global pandemic, and in some ways, many of us are still, the COVID is still a real thing, and people are still isolating. So I am all about using technology. I am not a Luddite by far. When it becomes bad is when we use it as a crutch, when there are opportunities to see people in person and we avoid them, sometimes for good reason. But I highly recommend, when you have to have a difficult conversation with someone, certainly in a professional setting, if it is possible, and it's not always possible, to do it in person. And if not, obviously Zoom or phone are a viable alternative. But I'm a huge believer also is, as we slowly migrate out of this, that we don't think about just going back to what we had. What about thinking about how we reimagine a future of connections? And it's funny, I was asked a few weeks ago about, how we've lost the serendipity of those water cooler moments. And yes, we have. However, when we now have the Zoom chat, which can be a very effective way to connect with people. Now, you may not want to be, chatting all the way through the meeting, because that's kind of rude to whoever the host is, or however. But if you think back to when you were in meetings, and for those of you here who are college students and you were in class, you can't really talk when the professor's speaking. At least when I was in college, you got in trouble. And I got a D in conduct in 5th grade. So I did my fair share of talking in class. Mind you, I thought my life was over in 5th grade. So I proved that wrong, but I still get like hives on the back of my neck when I think about that, coming home with that report card. Anyhow, I digress. But this notion that we can't be serendipitous, because we now have a real powerful tool that we didn't have before. So in other words, while I'm sitting here blah blahing, you all could be reaching out to someone else and just saying, hey, I'd like to make a phone date with you, for 5 minutes next Monday. The other thing I like to do in online sessions, which we can't do in a real room, I mean, I guess we can, is take a photo of who's in the room with their name.
That's nice.
When you are at a dinner or you're at a party, you can't take a photo and know, like, you may see the people, but you don't know their names. And here we have this added little thing with all of our names, although I know everyone in the room is Destiny, so it may be a little confusing. But in other words, instead of thinking about how do we mimic what we used to have,
right,
use the tools we now have to maybe make a future that is more desirable to the way we can work and be connected. So those are just some tips and things.
Those are great tips. Those are great tips. I think you also said, if you're a woman, you need 2 networks. Do you remember what they were? Sometimes I don't remember what I wrote in my own books.
Oh, that happens a lot. Well, I'm kind of disingenuous here, because I say, and I believe this firmly, that we can learn a lot from men. Men are much better at asking for what they want. And again, generalization. We are able to, mirror how they are much more confident in many cases. So I often recommend women have multiple networks and make sure they're meeting men. Now, I mind you, I haven't seen a man in 7 years, so I may not be living my best advice here. But when I worked in the corporate sector, I had many male friends. I happen to have 16 employees. They're all women. And most of our clients are women, but this is not intentional, and I'm trying to diversify.
No, but that's, I mean, you're talking to a women's community, and we're very strong about women helping women here. So, I think that's important for people to have. It's sort of like when we lived in Japan, one night would have over Japanese on the weekend, and then the other night would have people who spoke English like us, so people who speak women like us. I think anyway, it's good to have, I think it's great to have a women's network, and I wouldn't have met you, without this women's network, and we've all seen great things come out of it. Can you tell the group about the current leader of our group is Anne Choquette. I hope I'm saying her name right. She used to be the editor of 17. She's the head of New Power Media. And she used to have these dinners called Badass Babes dinners. Can you tell them about Badass Babes dinners?
Well,
I would go to that dinner in an instant.
Yeah, I have never gone because I was already like way past the age to be invited. But the goal was to really have a better understanding of, at the time, the millennial generation. It would probably now be Gen Z. But I think every Sunday or something, she would invite millennials over to have pizza and rosé and talk about their experiences to better understand. But I think another example, I have a good friend, Christina Vuletta, who years ago started something called 7 over 7. And what she did was she invited 40 somethings and 20 somethings together in a salon type setting. And the initial thought was the 40 somethings were going to be able to teach and provide all kinds of wisdom and guidance to the 20 somethings. But guess what happened? It was vice versa, right? And, the moral of the story goes back to that, let's not make assumptions, right? We all can learn from each other. We all can be, gaining and connecting no matter age or race or color. And this is an important exercise to, again, break out of our bubbles.
Yeah, definitely. So I do often think of you around ESG topics. So how important is diversity in your friends and in your work colleagues?
Well, look, you can't force anything, but one of the things I did over the years, I moved a lot professionally. So I went from Boston to DC to Southern California to Seattle to New York. And every time I would move, I would get involved in a local nonprofit. And the reason I did that was to meet people who were not like me and to learn something about the local community. So when I moved to New York, for instance, one of the nonprofits I got involved in is an organization that Jules knows called the Lower East Side Girls Club, which provides after school and evening, all sorts of learning opportunities, cooking, teaching, you name it, to the girls who live in the Lower East Side, which happens to be an area of New York where you have abject poverty right next to unbelievable wealth. And by 85% of those girls were of color. And so it was a pronounced way in my life to really learn more about people who were very, very different and came from a very, very different background. And I would do that each time I moved. So I do think we have to be intentional about building connections with people who are different. Now, it's very hard because we're living in a society that we know is filled with vitriol. I joined recently an organization called Starts With Us, which was founded by the founder of Kind Bars. We all know Kind Bars. And the goal of Starts With Us is to start helping us have conversations with people that we disagree with, which is very, very hard right now. But if we don't start doing it somewhere, there could be serious ramifications. So check out Starts With Us, just, for ideas. They give all kinds of tidbits of ways to have conversations. But I do think it's really, really important to try. And also, don't hesitate to ask people for introductions and connections to people who are different from you. I think sometimes we're afraid to ask others because we think it's putting them out. But when people ask me for introductions to others, I don't look at it as like, oh, another thing to do.
Yeah.
I think of it as an amazing opportunity to help people enrich their communities, but also the person you're introducing them to, it's an opportunity for them as well.
Yeah.
Now, I always ask permission because I don't want to obviously, bombard people if it, we know sometimes that people's lives, they can't, they're busy, they're taking care of family, etc. But I do think that we should never think of it as, no, I'm not going to make the connections.
Yeah. And I think I didn't do that enough when I was younger. Because I love to give advice now, unsolicited, so happy. So what if you're an introvert though? How does all this connecting work?
Well, there's a reason I didn't name the book The Lost Art of Networking.
I'm glad you didn't call it. I don't like the word networking. Do you? It's an awful word. It's so like, what can I get out of you? But connecting, that is often what, for 1 year, I made that my word when I went on stage. My intention before I go on stage was I just say connect. I just want to connect with people. And it's a great word.
If you look up in the Merriam-Webster dictionary, the definition of networking, it's kind of icky. Like you want to shower afterwards, right? Not that there's anything wrong with showering. But it is very transactional.
Mhm.
And one of the things I like to ask a show of hands for those of you on LinkedIn, how often do you receive a request to connect on LinkedIn and then within an hour, somebody is selling you something?
Yeah, totally.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what if instead, when somebody reached out and they connected with you, they said, Jules, I understand you're about to graduate from Wellesley. How can I be helpful in finding you a job?
Wow. What a difference.
Yeah. Or Jane, I understand you are an amazing comedian. I happen to know about a new theater that's opening up in Hartford, Connecticut, and they're looking for talent.
Yeah.
So I raise this because just reaching out and then selling to someone is networking. Going to an event, shaking hands, sharing business cards, and then 6 months later, not even remembering or following up. That's pretty much networking. Now,
I
instead,
always like when I've been in the trenches, what you were saying about the Lower East Side Girls Club, you have a common experience there, whether it's to raise money for them or do a friend raising, but I think when you've been in the trenches with somebody, that helps overcome, you don't even think of it as diversity. It's like we went through the war together, so now we're friends.
Yeah.
I think if people have a common goal, often, it's a.
well, I think it's really, networking is very much like, what can I get? What can I walk away with?
Yeah.
And we're going to have to do that in our lives. There's no doubt. But if we flip the switch and think about when we walk into a room, how can we be helpful? How can we make introductions? That becomes connecting versus networking.
And then another important point you make that I wrote down is no one can help you get what you want unless they know what that is. I mean, that's just, and that goes back to your very first point of the deep dive into yourself. What do you want? Where are you going? You have to put that into the universe. And, if they're lucky, you'll be part of their universe and you can help them get there. But it's just a very important thing to remember that no one can help you get it until you know what it is.
I mean, I have to say, I think overall, and I tend to live the world in rose-colored glasses, but I do think most people want to be helpful. I do think people do.
Totally.
There's always going to be those who aren't, and you know what? Good riddance. But we tend, as we go through our lives, we tend to find people who, at least I hope, are good people. And in terms of articulating what you want and who you are, I kind of have a short funny story how I came up with I'm a serial connector. In 2007, I went away with 7 girlfriends, and our goal that weekend, we went up to the Catskills, was to come up with our elevator speeches.
Oh,
and
great. Yeah.
in that time, that was when social media was really taking off. And it became really, really tantamount that you had a short, clear, concise message. And where elevator speech came was, if you're in an elevator with somebody, how do you tell them, crystally clear who you are? And by the end of that weekend, I was able to say, hi, I'm Susan McPherson and I'm a serial connector, da, 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 da. It sounded so ridiculous. I wanted to pee in my pants. But luckily,
it's spot on.
But the reason I was able to say it was because I felt safety. I was with 7 of my dearest friends who basically were able to, parrot back to me that I didn't sound like a complete crazy person.
Mm-hmm.
And we each went around the room, and that enabled us to leave so we could go home.
I noticed Melissa Lucky, who's a member of my class. She was, she's written 2 great books, but she first came to prominence at Sports Illustrated for suing for access to, I think it was baseball, to get into the men's locker room. Yeah, so she's a real trailblazer. But she was saying, Susan, absolutely right about connecting across interests. I oversee 2 Facebook verticals that relate to my books, one about girls and women in China. She has an adopted daughter who went to Wellesley, and the other about women in sports. I'm also very interested in women in sports. I rarely have ever posted about my books, but I post 5 or 6 times a day, stories that connect all of us to the topics that have brought us together as part of this community. That's what I mean, like about being in the trenches with people. And then when you have a common goal, it's like, then you stop seeing the difference in socioeconomic, race, sex, even. I mean, I even like men if I have a common purpose with them. But, what else did I want to ask you? Yeah, but getting back to, although I'm in a profession that I have to be outward facing and sort of other oriented, I am somewhat of an introvert. So how do the introverts connect? Yeah.
Sorry, I failed to answer that, and I will.
It's okay. My mind goes,
Well, as you can probably already tell, I am an extrovert, and so is Phoebe. And Phoebe, quiet. Jules knows her bark quite well. Jules, she was a baby. In fact, Jules named her. I just had to put that out
oh,
there.
sweet.
Yeah, she named her Phoebe after Phoebe on Friends. But remarkable. Anyhow, sorry, they named Phoebe. But because it isn't one to many like networking, because as Jane, you were just talking about, it's very much one to one, maybe one to two, it should be a little less fearful. The other thing that's magical today versus 20, 30 years ago is we often can find out who is going to be in the room before we attend.
Ah.
In the 80s, my first job was at USA Today, and I used to have to research and do interviews with people. So my name would be at the bottom of the story. I was a contributor, and before I would interview people, I would research them, and guess where I would research? The Encyclopedia Britannica. Okay, that's it.
The early Wikipedia, the Encyclopedia Britannica.
Yeah, and the thing is, you don't find out that much. Now, for people who may be introverted, before you go to an event, you can almost, not always, but pretty often, you can look up who's going to be in the room, and you can think about intentionally, who is it that you want to meet before? And then I always suggest, give yourself a limit. Say 3. Go with the intent, and this can be virtual or in person. Go with the intent. 3 people. Share 3 things about yourself, because we know if we don't open up, we can't expect others. And then learn 3 things. And then guess what? You can go hide in the bathroom. In other words, if you go with that intention, it's a little scary.
It takes the weight off of your shoulders, kind of. If you go prepared into anything. Wellesley women are always prepared.
Yeah.
I think I also remember you saying about the introvert, because I'm more at that end of the spectrum. Someone said to me, Jane, I think you're a situational extrovert. Like when I have to be, I will put it on, but my preferred is to be more back. But I think I remember you saying to adopt an extrovert or a super connector.
Find the student in the room, because inevitably you will then, be able to meet other people. And there's nothing more I love doing. And maybe it's because then once I introduce them, then I can go on to the next person, but I'm being obnoxious, but still.
But you get a shot of it. I like to give too. And I love introducing people to each other. If there's a need there and a need there, to put them together. How do people find the givers, Susan? I'm sincere. I mean, I feel lucky I fell over you, but how do you do it?
I mean, look, we live in a very public world now, and we can see somebody's track record really easily by looking at their Twitter feed, their LinkedIn feed. If we happen to see, look at them, and I'm not saying go stalk everyone before you meet, but, for instance, what I do on my social feeds is I showcase others. I love putting out juju. I love when somebody has something amazing happen to celebrate them.
Yeah.
And I figured that, like I was saying, there's enough vitriol. So if we can use these platforms to showcase people, so find the people doing that. Those are the people you want to connect with.
That's very interesting. That's great. Meg Oakes has something to say. She says, I'm curious what people's thoughts are on reconnecting when you have let connections lapse over many years. I've done this with both professional and personal former friends and colleagues, and now, as I'm feeling the need for greater connection, I'm kind of embarrassed to reach out.
And I completely understand that, but there's absolutely nothing to fear. And I have to say, as horrible as this pandemic has been, it has become the great equalizer, because no matter where you were on the planet, no matter what your socioeconomic, what your education, everything, we all experienced it. Obviously, some people had much more drastic situations, lost loved ones, lost livelihoods, but we all went through this. So you have every reason to reach back out to someone and blame, pardon me, the goddamn pandemic, right? It screwed us. Let's use it for something.
Yeah, so we've all been in that trench together. You know, when you've gone to war together, you have something in common.
And
Okay.
own it, own it. There's nothing, look, vulnerability builds connection. Now,
What a great,
it's-
that's very wise. Yeah.
but it's scary because you're putting yourself out there. And believe me, I still get nervous if I reach out to somebody and they ghost me and I feel like I suck, right? But in the end, they're one person and there are 10 billion people on this planet. And I think it's a good reminder. And if you try, well, then good for you. You're a better person for trying.
Yeah. Yeah. I also say to younger comedians, go to the love. I used to spend a lot of time trying to get that guy or woman in the audience with the arms crossed, like, oh, make me laugh, bitch. And now I just carve them out. And I go to the people who are laughing and enjoying the show. Because when they laugh, I get better. And when I get better, they laugh more, you know, and it's a virtuous. So what I realized about the person with the crossed arms is, you know, sometimes their grandmother died that day and I can't help them. I would like to, but I can't help them. So instead of knocking my head against their wall, I go to the person who I see the teeth, you know, or they're bending over and just enjoy that. Nancy Barron had something interesting to say. She said that this is back on another topic about cross-generation communication. She said the Conversationalist is an organization website dedicated to difficult conversations focused on Gen Z. So I hadn't heard of the Conversationalist. Have you heard of them?
I hadn't.
So that's good to know about. And I think it's kind of wonderful in this election. We just had the first member of Gen Z has been elected to public office. That's so another person who you and I have in common is the wonderful Ruth Ann Harnish, and she stresses the importance of self-care and drawing boundaries. Do you want to say anything about that?
Well, and again, Jules knows Ruth Ann for the Harnish Foundation. I think it's important. And I think sometimes when people hear me doing my talk about connecting and helping others, there's a bit of a, wait a minute, you know, I need to help myself. I need to help my kids and my parents. But I also believe we can be helpful, but also setting boundaries. And this doesn't mean you have to be helpful 24/7, but it also means if you can't be, put it in your calendar for 6 months from now, right? Last year, I had a lot of health issues. I was in the hospital 3 different times. So I couldn't be my helpful Susan. But what I did was I put calendar items for myself for September. It was May and June to get back to the people that I wasn't able to be helpful to.
Wow.
Just intentional.
I heard you once say something about how you would just call people and say, how's it going? I feel like, whoa.
Now, what I did during the pandemic partially was selfish. I'd been alone the entire time. I don't have parents. I don't have a partner. I don't have kids. And as much as Phoebe is wonderful, she doesn't speak my language.
Okay.
So every morning I would reach out to 3 different people, and there was no rhyme or reason who they were. It was just the 3 people that popped in my brain. And I would either text, WhatsApp, email, phone, and there'd be 3 kind of separate messages. 1, just, hey, I'm thinking of you and sending love. 2, how are you? It's been a tough time. Or 3, I'm here, don't forget about me. And to this day, I still do that. Now, for some people, the thought of reaching out to 3 people every morning, you know, you might as well just jump off the Brooklyn Bridge. So do it once a day. Do it once a week. But by being that person that reaches out, you're giving a gift to others. Think how wonderful it is when you're like in the midst of all the mishigash that we go through in life, and somebody just says, I'm thinking of you.
Yeah.
It is such a dose of dopamine,
Yeah.
and it's free. So to me, if we can all just do a little bit more of that, with intention, you know, we're not waiting for, just put it out there like Tinkerbell, although I guess Tinkerbell's
Another giver I know is Kathleen Tyler Conklin. She's in my class. She's been so wonderful to me. I've done fundraisers for her, National Association of Mentally Ill, and she's taken photographs of me, my one-person show, and so I listened to her when she talks, and she said, I like to write thank you notes to people who have helped me in the past. I mean, I always would send a Christmas card to my 4th and 5th grade teachers because, they were so important. She wrote, for example, I wrote to my camp counselor from when I was 12, thus thrilling her. And she's occasionally sent me a photo of me like in Times Square jumping into, the naked cowboy's lap. I mean, that makes me laugh. Not only is it about me, but it made me laugh. And this was like during the pandemic, and they're like, oh my God, what a wonderful person. Anyway, so going back to this, she would send to the camp counselor, thus thrilling her and renewing the connection now that I'm much older. This also connected me to her sister, Mink Stoll. Okay, this has to be an actual name. All right. A frequent player in John Walter's movies. We call Baltimore Smalltimore. Anyway, Kathleen is, if you ever need to know somebody in Maryland, she's who you need to know. And she's a great photographer.
Pickin said she has a question. Oh, yes, I have that question too. Oh, yes, I already answered that. Sorry.
Yeah, I think, have I missed anybody?
Yeah.
I'm
Is it
just trying to
appropriate to use LinkedIn?
get through that. Maybe you can tell people the difference between FOMO and FOMO and JOMO, JOMO.
Yes. I will in one second. Just a quick question about using LinkedIn in a casual way.
Oh,
If it is who you are, of course. I think it's totally fine, right? If it's who you, again, you want to be true to yourself, right? I mean, when people who've met me on Twitter in 2010 or 2011, they'll say to me, oh, you're just like your Twitter account. So I think it's important just to be who you are. And, there's nothing wrong with reaching out to someone if, via the direct message of LinkedIn and say, I'm thinking of you. So FOMO and JOMO, I came up with years ago because I had after I did the journalism stint at USA Today, I was trained as a salesperson. And I was working in a territory that I could not get in the door if my life depended on it. I'd be smiling and dialing. There was no internet, so there was no way to stalk people or find out about them or see what they were putting out on social media. And I could not get appointments. So I finally decided I was going to invite the 3 people that I did know, this was in Southern California, who worked in the field I was in, to have a coffee. We had so much fun. We decided we were going to replicate it. And for each of us to invite one other person. Within 8 months, we had more than 100 people in the industry. And guess what? I was able to get in the door. And it became a kind of gathering of people in public relations in Orange County, California. Started by what we called a coffee clatch. So what I learned then was, instead of the fear of missing out, which is what I had long before Instagram, which I now still have fear of missing out when I see all the parties I'm not invited to, but the joy of meeting others, not the joy of missing out. So it's just a mind frame, a mindset. And it's also a way for those of you who may be shy or introverted to know that you don't have to do all the inviting. Okay. You can invite 3 people and then ask each of them to bring 3 people. And guess what? You have a gathering. And by being the host of that gathering, whether you had to do all the inviting, you then can build those connections. There was a woman, and I'm failing to remember her name. I feature her in the book, who was featured years later in the New Yorker, Malcolm Gladwell. Joyce, oh God, it's going to come back to me. Forgive me. But she was the connector in Chicago. And Weisberg, Lois Weisberg, that's it.
Oh, you're good. I was just going into the index to try to.
I encourage you all to Google. If I, in my 80s, can be thought of as Lois Weisberg, I will be the happiest woman on the planet. But Lois was the grand doyenne of making connections across different medical fields, health fields, science, journalism, you name it. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote about her and the importance of meaningful connections. And she did this long before there was the internet and long before there was social media. Wow. So she is the epitome of JOMO. So.
That's good. I know you also are an angel investor, which I don't think enough women know enough about. Can you just talk about it a little bit?
Well, becoming an angel investor was a way for me to get a seat at the table. And I decided about 8 or 9 years ago, mainly because I didn't have kids and she's not going to go to college. So that I could use some of my extra income or some of my savings to invest in women-led startups. And to this day, I've invested in 22.
Wow. Well, thanks for turning me on to Hint water out of your refrigerator. I love Hint. It's great. I recommend it to everyone with acid reflux. It's great.
But and obviously I am privileged. I have the means to do that. So, I don't take that lightly. But I also, as an entrepreneur, as someone who became an entrepreneur fairly late in her professional career, by doing that, I have visibility into other companies. So it isn't just, me being this, philanthropic investor. It's also, self-serving, because then I get to meet founders, I get to sit in the rooms with them, I get to learn from them. And it has become a wonderful way to connect with people that maybe I wouldn't. But I also realize that, I am very, very fortunate to be able to do that, and not everybody can. But the other thing is there's now lots and lots of ways you can do. You don't have to be writing checks, of massive size. There are new financial vehicles that allow you to put $500 into a new company. So, for those of you who are just kind of starting to dabble in this kind of alternative investment, it's very risky. Don't get me wrong. I've made zero in 9 years. Still holding out for something. But the point is it is another way to connect. And I do think as women, we typically don't talk about money as much as we should.
Yes. Yeah.
Financial resources. And if we did talk about it, we probably wouldn't be in the situation we are in, making significantly less than our male counterparts.
Well, you've ended up being an advisor for a lot of companies. I love She's the First, a lot of nonprofits, particularly, who sends the young people to school first in their families. But how do you trip over these people? Or you have enough groups of friends but you must have friends of all ages, because I know Tammy Tibbetts of She's the First she's younger than we are.
How many here don't have children?
Jules.
I think now at age 58, I realized by not having children, and it wasn't intentional, I always wanted to have kids, I wasn't grouped with the parents of my kids' friends. So in other words, there wasn't the PTA, there wasn't the after school. So it in some ways opened up a big gap to meet people who were of all different ages, if that makes sense. So I think just from that reason, my I hate to say it, but my Rolodex is people in their 20s and their 50s, and also just having moved a lot, and leading with curiosity. And something that Jules' grandparents taught me was this notion that every single person, no matter who they are, is worthy of our interest, our curiosity, our kindness, and our compassion. So it has made me to be this just unbelievably curious person. I love learning about other people, which probably makes me a neurotic person, but it's also made me, I think it's enriched my lives. And I will tell you one real quick story, because I think it's really important for people, because we tend, and I don't know about you all, but I tend to be guilty of having preconceived notions. And it's something my dad really tried to get me to not do, to go with these assumptions. I remember, I can't apply to that college, I'll never get in. Don't assume. Or, that person can't help me because that person works in a different field. Don't assume. So in 2017, it was a Tuesday afternoon, and I got an email from a friend who works at UBS. And she said, Susan, can you help my friend Brandt, a filmmaker, get into a refugee camp tomorrow?
Tomorrow. I like the tomorrow.
In Greece. Now, to level set, for years, I have served on the board of the UN High Commission for Refugees. So it wasn't completely out of left field. However, getting someone in a refugee camp the next day is very hard. And 2, I was busy. And 3, all my brain kept telling me is, he's a filmmaker. The last thing the world needs is another documentary film about refugees that no one is going to go see. So I was like, but I had 20 minutes. And I said, you know what? I'm going to try. I made a few calls, and lo and behold, I got Brandt in the next day to Lesbos. Now, 2 weeks later, I learned that Brandt wasn't a documentary filmmaker. He was a big budget Hollywood filmmaker that had done multiple Tom Cruise films.
Oh my God.
And while he was there, he became, dare I say, smitten with the cause of refugees.
Oh, yay.
Months later, another friend reached out who was an advisor to the NGO CARE. And she said, Susan, do you know any filmmakers who can go and spend 2 weeks on the Syrian border at a refugee camp to teach teens how to make films about their experience when they fled Syria? I reached out to Brandt. Not 5 minutes later, he said yes.
Oh,
And
wow.
he gathered 8 Hollywood film directors to join him.
Oh my God.
And they spent almost 2 weeks with these kids who produced and created the most incredibly touching and meaningful films about their experience. But there's more. He went on to create a short called Refugee that Angelina Jolie happened to see.
Oh my God.
Angelina Jolie is the one of the top ambassadors to UNHCR. So she, since then, has been taking this film out to world leaders so that they can be reminded that our refugee struggle and crisis is completely, and it's, we know it's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting much worse with climate. The good news is that film, which was a short, is now going to be a major feature film that's going to come out in 2024.
Oh, bravo.
So, moral of the story. I don't take responsibility for all that happened. Boy, what a lesson I learned.
Wow. I love the ripple effect of all this. And thank you for, taking us through it, one by one. I think in all those 6 pages of praise about your book, my favorite, I just want to quote it, is Reshma Saujani, if I'm saying it right, from Girls Who Code, saying, "This book is more than a career guide. It's a roadmap to a more meaningful life and enduring relationships." So, Susan, I just want to say thank you. You've been so wonderful. Jules, do you want to say any parting? Or are you fine? Are we all?
I guess one thing I just wanted to quickly address was, I wanted to ask you for any advice that you had for students who feel like they might not have anything to offer in exchange for
Great
help.
question.
Just because that's a position I currently find myself as I'm graduating in December, and I feel like I kind of need to rely more on others than I can provide, if that makes sense.
Well, first of all, and that makes complete sense. And there's going to be times in your life that you do need to rely on others. But I do think this is where your friends can be really helpful, your family, your aunt. And you should make, 5-minute calls with people and have a discussion with them and say, what do you think my superpowers are? And then have a meaningful discussion about it, right?
Oh, I love this.
Okay. It's a little like looking in the mirror, but a mirror that actually talks to you. Okay. And not a mirror that gives us like heebie-jeebies, which so often can happen, right? So to me, I think you need to ask the people. You have an amazing cousin that lives nearby. You have lots of friends who love you. And I think for those students who are on, I think start asking that question. And also don't overthink it, right? I think sometimes, again, we think it has to be, we have a PhD in, electrophysics, even if that is, you can get a PhD. When actually it can be, I'm a great connector. I'm a prolific reader. These are things that actually, are superpowers. So, and a notebook can be your best friend, and start jotting down things. But also just remember, just making introductions for people is a superpower. So
That's great. What are my superpowers? You have youth, Jules. That's a very important factor. Anyway, you've been so wonderful, Susan. Thanks to everybody who came. I hope everybody's had a good time. You're always, just so wise, and you're so generous. And I had not Rose like you, and it's a model for me. You make me want to. I try to be a giver, but you make me want to give even more and help more people connect. So you're just an angel. Everybody go out there, buy that book, Lost Art of Connecting. Great for new college seniors graduating. Great for Christmas, great for Hanukkah, great for every holiday, great for birthdays. And anyway, you're a gift, and thanks for joining the Wellesley community. You're now honorary Wellesley.
So I never would have been accepted. I can tell you that much.
We're happy to have you. Bye-bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.